January 1945, Poland. The kind of cold that doesn't just freeze your fingers, it freezes your thoughts. The ground is iron. The air bites. Every breath hurts. Joseph Beyrle is standing alone in the snow. No helmet, no weapon, no flag. Just a skinny American paratrooper in filthy German prison rags, with both hands raised high over his head. In his right hand, a crumpled pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes. That's it. That's his entire survival plan. In front of him, engines growl. Steel tracks chew through frozen mud. Snow shakes off armor plates. A column of Soviet tanks rolls straight toward him, barrels low, crews tense, fingers near triggers. From a distance, he looks like a spy, or a lunatic, or a dead man who just hasn't been shot yet. One tank stops. The hatch creaks open. Joseph Beyrle squints, waiting to see the face of the man who's about to decide whether he lives or dies. And then someone climbs out of the turret. Not a hardened Soviet officer, not a scarred tank veteran, not a man at all. It's a woman. She's young, 23 maybe. Her face is pale from exhaustion. Her uniform is stained with oil and soot. Her hair is tucked under a tanker's helmet. She looks down at the American holding cigarettes like an offering. Her name is Alexandra Samusenko. And in that frozen moment, history swerves. Alexandra Samusenko was not supposed to exist, at least not according to the rules. Women in the Red Army were medics, radio operators, snipers, sometimes if the war got desperate enough. But tank commanders? No. That was a job reserved for men with iron nerves and expendable futures. And yet here she was. Alexandra Samusenko was the only known female tank commander in the 1st Guards Tank Army, one of the most elite armored formations in the entire Soviet military. She didn't get the position because it looked good on a propaganda poster. She got it because she survived. She had already fought at Kursk, the largest tank battle in human history. Thousands of machines. Steel colliding with steel. The ground shaking like it was alive. At Kursk, Samusenko's crew destroyed 3 German Tiger tanks. Not Panzer IVs, not half-tracks. Tigers, 88mm guns. Armor thicker than most Allied tanks could penetrate head-on. She killed them anyway. And she kept going. Why? Because there was nothing else left. The war had taken everything from her. Her husband gone, her family gone, her home gone. The Germans had erased her past. So she decided to erase them. Revenge wasn't a slogan for Alexandra Samusenko. It was fuel. She led from the front, always. She rode with her hatch open so she could see the battlefield with her own eyes. She exposed herself to fire so her crew wouldn't hesitate. Her soldiers didn't follow her because she was a woman. They followed her because she didn't flinch. Back in the snow, Joseph Beyrle is still standing there with his cigarettes. Someone yells in Russian. A political officer or commissar pushes forward, furious. To him, Beyrle is a problem. An American POW who escaped German camps? Suspicious. An armed foreigner near Soviet armor? Dangerous. The commissar wants to arrest him. Send him to the rear. Interrogate him. Maybe shoot him if the paperwork gets messy. This is how the Red Army works. Alexandra Samusenko listens. Then she cuts him off. She asks Beyrle questions through broken words and hand gestures. Who are you? Why are you here? Who do you want to kill? Beyrle answers the only way he can. He points west, toward Germany. He doesn't want freedom. He doesn't want safety. He wants another weapon. Samusenko understands instantly. She doesn't see a spy. She sees a soldier who escaped hell and came back for more. She turns to the commissar and overrules him. No arrest, no rear area, no paperwork. Instead, she does something that has never happened before. She hands Joseph Beyrle a uniform. Then she hands him a tank. An M4 Sherman American-made, delivered to the Soviets through Lend-Lease. She gives him a spot in her battalion. Just like that, Joseph Beyrle becomes the only known American soldier to fight alongside the Red Army during World War II. Not as an advisor, not as a liaison, as a tanker. The advance toward Berlin is brutal. No speeches, No banners, just grinding forward meter by meter. Villages burn. Roads disappear under tracks. German resistance comes in sharp, desperate bursts. Beyrle fights with Samusenko's unit for weeks. They don't share a language, but they don't need one. Tankers understand each other through smoke and motion and instinct. Alexandra treats him like any other soldier. No special treatment, no protection. Respect is earned in combat, and Beyrle earns it. He helps knock out German positions. He loads shells. He bleeds when the armor shakes. They share cigarettes when they can find them. In those moments, engine idling, snow falling, distant artillery rumbling, there's something like peace. Two people from opposite sides of the world, bound together by a war neither of them asked for. Alexandra never talks about the future, because she doesn't believe in one. February 1945. Beyrle is hit during a German counterattack. Shrapnel tears into him. Blood soaks through winter clothing. This time he doesn't get to choose. He's evacuated, pulled away from the tanks, from the front, from Alexandra. They don't say goodbye properly. There's no time. The war keeps moving. Beyrle survives. He eventually returns home. Alexandra Samusenko does not slow down. She keeps fighting. March 3, 1945, just 70 kilometers from Berlin. The end is finally visible. The Germans are breaking, the war is dying, and that's when it happens. Night movement, dark roads, exhausted crews, engines rumbling low to avoid attention. In the chaos, a Soviet tank shifts position. Metal grinds, tracks slip. Alexandra Samusenko is struck, crushed beneath the weight of the very machine that carried her through the war. No enemy fire, no final charge. After surviving Kursk, after surviving years of combat, she dies in an accident, less than a month before victory. She is buried near the village of Zuzicznau in Poland. No parade, no headline, just another name swallowed by the war. Wars don't end cleanly. They don't stop with a final explosion and a neat line in a history book. Sometimes they end quietly, with a tank engine cooling in the dark, with a body pulled from crushed steel, with no one left who has the energy to argue that this death mattered. Alexandra Samusenko's death barely caused a ripple. The Red Army was racing toward Berlin. Entire divisions were dying every week. Commanders didn't stop to mourn one tank officer, no matter how brave she'd been. Her unit moved on. Another officer took her place. Another name filled the slot on the roster. And that was that. No investigation. No grand recognition. No special burial. In the Soviet system, survival was the reward. Death, even heroic death, was paperwork. There are reasons you've probably never heard her name. First, she was a woman. The Soviet Union loved using women in propaganda, but only in very specific ways. Snipers? Yes. Medics? Absolutely. Pilots, if they fit the myth? Fine. But a female tank commander, especially one who wasn't carefully managed by the state narrative, was inconvenient. She didn't fit a clean story. She wasn't smiling in staged photos. She wasn't giving speeches about the party. She wasn't a symbol. She was dirty. She cursed. She fought. Second, she left no memoir. So many famous war stories survived because someone lived long enough to write them down. Alexandra didn't. No diary. No post-war interview. No chance to reshape her own legend. And third, her most extraordinary act involved an American. A U.S. paratrooper fighting in a Soviet tank battalion was not a story either side was eager to promote during the Cold War. It complicated things. So the story sat quietly in footnotes, half remembered by veterans, waiting for someone stubborn enough to pull it back into the light. Joseph Beyrle came home a hero. He'd jumped into Normandy. He'd escaped German POW camps. He'd fought with the Red Army. It sounds unbelievable because it almost is. But even he struggled to explain it. How do you tell people about a woman in a Soviet tank who trusted you without knowing your language? How do you describe someone who lived entirely for the war and died before peace could prove whether it was worth it? Beyrle carried that with him. For decades, whenever he spoke about the war, Alexandra Samusenko was there just beneath the surface. not as a legend, as a presence. Years later, Beyrle tried to find her resting place. Not for publicity, not for politics. For closure, records were messy. Place names had changed. Borders had shifted. Zulzitz wasn't even called Zulzitz anymore. What he found instead was a hard truth about war memory. If no one fights to remember you, you disappear. Entire lives erased between archive folders. Alexandra Samusenko didn't have children to look for her. She didn't have a country eager to claim her story. All she had was a former POW remembered the sound of her tank and the way she made decisions without hesitation. Sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes, it isn't. We love clean heroes. Heroes who survive. Heroes who give speeches. Heroes who fit into neat lessons. Alexandra Samusenko doesn't do any of that. Her courage was ugly. It was born from loss, not ideology. From anger, not optimism. She didn't fight because she believed the world would be better. She fought because everything she loved was already gone, and that kind of courage makes people uncomfortable. Because it asks a question we don't like answering. What happens when survival isn't the goal anymore? There's a particular cruelty in how she died. She survived German artillery, survived tigers, survived Kursk. And in the end, she was killed by her own side's machine. Not by malice, not by cowardice, just exhaustion. A tired army moving at night, racing toward an ending that came too late for her. It's the kind of death that doesn't fit monuments, so it gets forgotten. Alexandra Samusenko gave the war everything. Her family, her future, her body. And the war took her quietly, without ceremony, just short of the finish line. Victory came weeks later. Berlin fell. Flags went up. The world exhaled. Somewhere beneath the soil of Poland, a tank commander who had led men through fire never saw it. To understand Alexandra Samusenko, you have to understand where she fought. The Eastern Front wasn't a battlefield. It was a meat grinder. No rotation home. No soft rear areas. No illusion that survival is normal. Winter didn't pause the war, it weaponized it. Men froze inside tanks. Oil thickened like glue. Steel cracked. Wounded soldiers didn't scream. They went quiet. This was the front where entire villages vanished overnight, where civilians learned not to cry because crying got you noticed. And this is where Alexandra Samusenko commanded a tank, not from behind a map table. From the hatch. Tank crews are claustrophobic by nature. 5 people, locked in steel. One mistake kills everyone. Respect inside a tank isn't given, it's demanded. Samusenko earned it the hard way. She didn't shout unless she had to. She didn't posture. She didn't threaten. She made decisions fast. When a tiger appeared, she didn't freeze. When infantry panicked, she didn't hesitate. Her crews learned something quickly. If Alexandra told you to advance, she'd already calculated the cost and accepted it herself. That matters, especially on a front where cowardice and hesitation killed more men than bullets. Some soldiers later said she drove like she was already dead. Not reckless, resolved. There were rules she violated simply by existing. Women weren't supposed to command men in armor units. Women weren't supposed to expose themselves to direct fire. Women weren't supposed to override political officers. She did all 3. The commissar who tried to arrest Joseph Beyrle wasn't just enforcing protocol, he was protecting the system, and Alexandra ignored him. That wasn't bravery, that was dangerous. Because in the Red Army, disobeying a political officer could end your career or your life, but she'd already lost everything worth protecting. So she chose the soldier over the system. And history almost punished her by forgetting her entirely. Giving Beyrle an M4 Sherman wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. The Sherman was American steel fighting in a Soviet column, driven by a former German POW under the command of a woman history didn't know what to do with. That tank shouldn't have existed, but war doesn't care about neat categories. The Sherman was also fragile compared to Soviet armor. Thin-skinned, prone to fire. Nicknamed Ronzins because they lit up easily. And yet, it kept moving, just like the people inside it. There are moments soldiers remember more clearly than combat. The silence after. Engines ticking as they cool. Someone sharing bread that tastes like cardboard. A cigarette passed hand to hand. Beyrle remembered Alexandra in those moments. She didn't talk much. She watched. Always scanning. Always alert. As if the war might try to sneak up on her. Sometimes she smiled, but only briefly. As if smiling too long felt like tempting fate. By March 1945, the Red Army didn't need heroes. It needed momentum. The Germans were collapsing. Resistance was fragmented. The end was mathematically inevitable. That's often when accidents happen, because everyone's tired, because vigilance slips, because survival finally feels close enough to touch. Alexandra Samusenko died not because she failed, but because the war was finally ending. And endings are dangerous. Her death wasn't cinematic. No enemy breakthrough, no last stand, no final radio call. Just weight, steel, darkness. That makes her hard to package, hard to mythologize. So she became a footnote. Not because she was a woman, not because she helped an American, but because she represents the kind of courage that doesn't survive peace, the courage of people who fight not to win, but because stopping feels worse than dying. Alexandra Samusenko didn't live long enough to become a legend, so we have to do it for her.